Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski, and later I will be joined by a guest, Tom Ullathorne, the organizer for West Lothian and a member of Socialist SNP party. Now, for the Ukraine update, day 694. A Ukrainian drone attack hit an oil terminal in St. Petersburg today as part of a new phase of war in the region, according to reports in the Kiev Independent. Russia's defense ministry said today that Russian forces have taken control of Vesely, a settlement in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. Ukraine has bought 6 Caesar howitzers, paying €3 million to €4 million for each. France's defense minister, Sébastien Lecornu, has said today. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held his annual briefing in Moscow today, speaking for almost 3 hours. He said Russia's special military operation in Ukraine has brought about a certain purification of Russian society and made it healthier. He also said Russia can no longer trust the West, end quote. Lavrov claims that Ukraine will not decide on conditions to end the conflict, as Washington is calling the shots. He added that not the slightest interest has been shown by the US and other Western nations in ending the war. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban called for EU support to Ukraine to be reviewed annually. Orban criticized liberal politicians for wanting to give money to Ukraine over 4 years, claiming it would be anti-democratic to do so just ahead of European Parliament elections in June. Estonia said it would not renew the residence permit of the head of the Estonian Orthodox Church by the Moscow Patriarch. Metropolitan Eugene saying the Russian national was a security risk. Nuclear envoys of South Korea and the US and Japan condemned North Korea and its arms trade with Russia, recent missile tests, and increasingly hostile rhetoric at a meeting in Seoul today. Japan's envoy, Hiroyuki Namazu, condemned Pyongyang's ballistic missile launch and said there must be close monitoring of what Russia may be providing to North Korea in return for armaments. Russian forces launched 33 Iranian-designed attack drones at Ukraine overnight and fired guided missiles at its second-largest city of Kharkiv in the east, said Ukraine's Air Force today. It added that its air defense system had downed 22 of the drones. Schools in western Ukraine are rolling out rifle and pistol shooting practices using interactive software, a regional office said. Russia has filed charges against 68 foreign mercenaries for fighting for Ukraine, according to the Russian state-run TASS news agency. Russian state prosecutors asked a Moscow court to sentence prominent nationalist Igor Girkin to 5 years in prison for inciting extremism today. Girkin has publicly accused Putin and top army officials of not pursuing the war in Ukraine harshly or effectively enough. The US and its allies are looking for a way to unfreeze $300 billion in Russian central bank funds, sitting mostly in Europe, and use them to benefit Ukraine. The Russian city of Belgorod cancelled its traditional Orthodox Epiphany festivities on Friday due to the threat of attacks on Kiev's forces. As Kiev's forces pursue a new strategy. Moving on to the Israel-Gaza latest. The Gaza Health Ministry has said a total of 24,620 Palestinians have been killed and 61,830 have been injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since 7th October. In the statement today, the ministry said 172 Palestinians were killed and 326 have been injured in the past 24 hours. The European Parliament has voted a call for a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, but on conditions that all Israeli hostages held in the territory are released and Hamas is dismantled. Benjamin Netanyahu said he informed the US that he opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state as part of any post-conflict scenario. Israel will only agree to a deal that would see the country gain security control over the entire Gaza Strip, the Israel Prime Minister said at a news conference today. Israel's president told the Davos conference that there is an empire of evil emanating from Tehran, which must be faced by a very strong coalition, and that Gaza's population is entrenched in a network of terror. Israel's military has said it is operating on the ground in the southernmost area of that IDF ground troops have operated in so far. At least 16 people have been killed by an Israeli airstrike in the house of Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. A relative of those killed told Al Jazeera that the family had relocated from within Gaza 3 times for safety since 7th of October. Israel's military has repeatedly ordered Gaza's civilian population to flee to the south. Internet and mobile services continue to be cut off by Israel inside the Gaza Strip. The present outage has lasted for 5 days, according to internet access advocacy group NetBlocks. An airstrike on southern Syria early on Thursday killed at least 9 people and was probably carried out by the Jordanian Air Force. Tehran has strongly condemned a strike inside Iran by Pakistan, which killed 9 people, which Islamabad said was aimed at terrorists. Deputy governor for Iran's Sistan-Balochistan province said the dead include 3 women and 4 children and were not Iranian citizens. The strike follows an Iranian attack inside Pakistan the previous day, which Tehran said was aimed at terrorists there. Pakistan and its military was on extremely high alert, and any more misadventure from the Iranian side will be met forcefully, they said. The US military has fired another wave of missile strikes against Houthi-controlled sites, marking the 4th time in a week that it has directly targeted the group in Yemen. The strikes were launched from the Red Sea. India's Navy have said today that it had responded to a drone attack distress call from a vessel in the Gulf of Aden, and that the ship's crew were safe and a fire on board is under control. We're still waiting on our guest, Tom Ullathorne. Unfortunately, technical issues are holding him back. However, we are moving on to the next story, which is in the UK. As Sunak holds as a Sunak press conference demands, in a conference, Sunak demands that the Lords pass the Rwanda bill as Tory MPs put in letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. In a hastily arranged Downing Street press conference today, Rishi Sunak has urged the House of Lords to swiftly pass his controversial Rwanda deportation bill, claiming it is the will of the people, and insisting the Conservative Party is united on the issue despite the week's mass rebellions. The Prime Minister said it was now up to peers to fall in line. The legislation unilaterally declares Rwanda a safe country to which to deport asylum seekers. The treaty with Rwanda is signed, and the legislation which deems Rwanda a safe country has been passed unamended in our elected chamber, Sunak said in the opening remarks. There's now only one question. Will the opposition in the appointed House of Lords try and frustrate the will of the people as expressed by the elected House, or will they get on board and do the right thing? It's as simple as that. We have a plan, and the plan is working. End quote. While the Lords are expected to pass the bill, it is likely to face significant opposition and delay, and could be returned to the Commons with amendments. Given the scale of concern about the plans and whether they breach international law, this could wreak havoc with Sunak's pledge to have the first planes leave for Rwanda in the spring, which could further enrage Tory MPs on the right of the party. Although there were only 11 Conservative MPs who voted against the third reading on Wednesday evening, more than 60 rebelled over the amendments. More than 60 rebelled over amendments during 2 days of debate, showing the scale of unrest among many backbenchers. The Free Frontbenchers resigned and Free Frontbenchers had resigned. After a vote, reports claimed several MPs had submitted letters of no confidence in Sunak, responding to the Prime Minister's statements, and the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson, Alison Fulis MP, said, "With temperatures plummeting, energy bills skyrocketing, and inflation on the rise, people across Scotland will have been filled with despair at the Prime Minister spending his morning talking about shipping vulnerable people off to Rwanda. His priorities are all wrong, and the public are fed up. Instead of targeting vulnerable people fleeing war and persecution, the UK government should be prioritising supporting households battling with Westminster-made cost of living crisis." Very sorry. Light sore throat. So, Tom Ullathorne is just about to join us, and we'll likely have many comments for the stories that we just passed by now. We might do a short recap of the stories, maybe especially this Rishi Sunak one. So I will do a quick scan, and we will do a really short redo, and we will offer our guest a moment to comment. Going over some of the comments again for emphasis and update, I suppose. The Prime Minister obviously said that it is up to the peers to fall in line. Legislation unilaterally declares Rwanda a safe country to which to deport asylum seekers. Start of quote, "The treaty with Rwanda is signed, and the legislation which deems Rwanda a safe country has been passed unamended in our elected chamber," end quote, Sunak said in his opening remarks. He then went on to say that there is now only one question. Will the opposition in the appointed House of Lords try and frustrate the will of the people as expressed by the elected House? Or will they get on board and do the right thing? It's as simple as that. We have a plan, and the plan is working. The House of Lords, Tory MPs are that have lost faith in Rishi Sunak. Some are starting to write letters of no confidence. Through the 1922 committee. Should enough of these votes of no confidence rack up, then then Rishi Sunak will obviously have to leave his post as Prime Minister and leader of a Conservative party, which would lead to yet another leadership election for the Conservative Party, making it the fourth in the past 10 years. Looking at the story in more detail, since the bill is passed the House of Commons, the House of Lords will now be looking at it. I'm not sure exactly what the expected outcome is from the House of Lords, but it can be rejected a few times and set back for amendments in the House of Commons. And unfortunately, the technical issues are a little bit stronger than we thought they were going to be. We will end up moving on to the next story, which is the Home Office resuming the asylum hotel evictions despite freezing weather. We will likely come back to the previous Rwanda bill story once our guest is here to hear comments. Very sorry. The Home Office has been urged to reintroduce a pause on asylum hotel evictions after resuming the practice in recent days, leaving refugees out on the streets in sub-zero temperatures. In December, the Home Office said that it would halt evictions from asylum accommodations for up to 3 days, while Severe Weather Emergency Protocol, SWEP, was activated by a local authority. SWP, or SWEP, is activated when the Met Office forecasts a temperature of below 0 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 3 nights. In large parts of the UK, SWEP has been in place for longer than 3 days and is expected to remain until the end of a week as temperatures plummet in London. In London, SWEP has been activated for 6 days and counting. With the 3 days pause over, Home Office evictions have resumed despite the sub-zero temperatures. Tuesday was the coldest January night since 2019. When SWEP protocols are in place, councils dispatch outreach workers and open additional emergency housing to increase their capacity to house rough sleepers. Charities have said many of those evicted from Home Office accommodation are struggling to access local authority support for those who are street homeless, and they are entitled to, meaning some end up sleeping rough. Now, I believe our guest is on the line. Tom, are you there? So once again, Tom Ullathorne, our organizer for West Lothian and member of the SNP Socialists.
Okay. Hiya. Yeah, good. Am I? Okay, yeah, it's going to be. I'll try and shout a bit. Okay, great stuff. Thanks.
Could you manage to join us? Hopefully technical issues won't persist past this point. So we just covered the updates on the Rwanda bill with Rishi Sunak sort of pushing for the House of Lords to pass his bill as soon as possible, claiming that it is the will of the people for the Rwanda bill to be passed without any sort of obstruction. I would guess, asking you, Tom, do you think that the Rwanda bill does represent the will of the people? And on further point, do you think that people like Suella Braverman or Robert Jenrick, who oppose the current iteration, do you think they will try to take more of a public stance, a public limelight, kind of pulling the Rwanda bill in their favor as time goes on? What do you think of that?
I mean, personally, I find it very offensive. It's certainly not in the name of this person, the Rwanda bill, nor anybody indeed that I know personally. It's a concoction. It's for a particular type of politics. We could call it a culture war, and that's what they will push and push and push. If we take perspective here, the Rwanda policy, they talk about the maximum in the first phase being 200 people. That's not going to make even the slightest dent in numbers of asylum seekers using hotels, for instance. There's lots of things that could be done, but this is all. Rwanda is a big distraction from a humane asylum policy, for as the SNP has called for safe legal routes, and there are other things that can happen to really help refugees and asylum seekers when they're here. For instance, an ability to work. If they could work, they wouldn't necessarily be such a drag on the public purse. That's not necessarily my first consideration, but that gets headline news. So actually, it's more about distraction from people's actual material conditions that is the problem. And that's the problem with the Rwanda scheme as a whole, is that it's a big distraction from the Tories doing nothing about housing or about processing asylum claims. I mean, they talk about it being a broken system. It's a deliberately broken system. They want backlog because they say, well, this is a broken system. Let's fly some people to Rwanda. Anyway, I could keep on. I thought this week that lots of very measured responses against the Rwanda plan. I was really interested to hear Joanna Cherry's disposition yesterday, talking about the real differences between the English and the Scottish legal system, how that was framed in the Treaty of Union, and how in Scottish law and obviously Scottish constitutional politics, it's the people who are sovereign rather than Parliament. So it gives really different legal character to Scottish law than English law. There is a presumption that we will follow human rights legislation and international standards within Scottish law. It would appear from a UK government is moving away from international law. Anyway, thanks.
I just wanted to ask Videsk, should we move on to the next story, or do you want to talk about... Okay. I guess since we're on the topic of treatment of refugees, I guess it would be important to get you to comment on the other story we just covered, which is where some asylum hotels have evicted migrants that they've had there, despite the freezing conditions and the freezing weather. There are people, there are refugees that are being evicted from hotels despite the freezing temperatures. Do we need more security measures in place for these people? How is it that they can be treated like this? Could you comment on that a little?
Of course it does. I mean, I think some of I read for instance, the Guardian article on refugees being evicted in London. I think it's probably a similar case in Scotland. I know that the local authorities work really hard to accommodate all people that are resident in a local authority area. I know, and I have friends who are Ukrainian, and obviously they have a certain settled, they have a certain refugee status, granted asylum from a terrible war at home. But even then, it's a struggle to get appropriate housing, to be able to have housing which meets a family's need, to be able to link in with changing school needs, medical needs. That's for a Ukrainian family I know who are supported. With the Home Office, it's brutal that they are continuing to evict people in this weather.
Thank you for that. For the next story, the SNP call the Labour plan to slash tax for the super rich shameful. The SNP have pledged it will strongly oppose Labour Party plans to slash taxes for the super rich at the expense of working families across Scotland. End quote. After Rachel Reeves admitted that she was considering the plan. Speaking in Davos, in an interview with Telegraph, the Shadow Chancellor was asked whether a Labour Party government would seek to cut taxes for those earning more than £100,000 a year, and she answered yes. Unite's Sharon Graham responded to the interview by saying, It is increasingly clear that the state intervention and investment is needed if we are to achieve net zero, ensure our energy security, and retain the growth industries vital to the national interests, such as steel. This is something governments in the European Union and US understand and are acting on, end quote. Sharon Graham said that she was concerned that Rachel Reeves seems to have been moving further away from this position in an event in Davos. The event, she said, epitomizes the problem of vast wealth not being redistributed fairly or used to invest in the real economy. Quote, if she does not do the right thing, it will be working people and the country's future success that pay the price for it, end quote, said Ms. Graham, commenting. The SNP economy spokesperson, Drew Hendry MP, said, the SNP will strongly oppose Labour Party plans to slash taxes for the super rich at the expense of working families across Scotland, who are already enduring a Westminster-made cost of living crisis. It's clear the SNP's strong opposition to austerity cuts will be a major dividing line between the SNP and the Tory Labour Westminster establishment at the next election. It's shameful that Keir Starmer's party want to give handouts to the richest in society, while admitting they will continue Tory spending cuts to public services and incomes of ordinary working families who are struggling to pay their mortgages, rents, and energy bills. It shows just how out of touch they are. Tom, I was wondering, to your best estimation, to what extent is this new path of Labour, the Keir Starmer Labour, resonating with the UK and more specifically with Scotland?
I don't think it is. I mean, the UK is a collection of nations, I would say, but is a country in dire need of change. The Labour Party at the moment under Keir Starmer are talking about change. They're also talking about being prudent. They're talking about balancing the books, fiscal framework, all things which just point back to a neoliberal framework. We will in effect be promised austerity by Reeves if she wants to. There's only probably lots of working parts in any economy, but you can't have both record spending on public services as well as tax cuts for the rich. Working families it used to be the bread and butter of Labour. I mean, I think a lot of people in the SNP might have formerly been in the Labour Party, but the Labour Party certainly at the moment is moving away from a lot of Scottish people. Labour looked very, very scared to equalise income tax, taxing people working for and gaining income from working by the hour. They're scared to equalise that with a wealth tax or with capital gains tax. Capital gains tax is relatively much lower than income tax, so people can sit and accrue more wealth for doing nothing, maybe for investing their money, but they're not grafting to earn that money. Whereas somebody who is earning a wage, like I say, grafting away to earn a wage, is taxed at a higher rate. It's quite ridiculous. One of the problems for Labour is that they've made a lot of promises about a renewed country, but they're prefacing it on very small tax takes. For instance, from the nom-dom tax statement, which I think brings in the order of a couple of billion, but don't quote me on that. Not a lot of money, and also the tax on public schools. They're looking to close that tax loophole for them. But again, that's not going to earn a great amount of money. Rachel Reeves also talks about, the main way that we will be able to pay increased public services is through growth in the economy. But there's no signs of how they will gain that growth other than by the classic kind of entrepreneurial model. So Rachel Reeves is in Davos at the moment. The Labour Party at the moment have changed from a membership model where under Corbyn, where it was the biggest social party in Europe, to a donor-funded party with significantly less members, but more donations from private healthcare. So, yeah, it's a very difficult Labour Party. I'm very glad that I'm in the SNP and I don't have to necessarily worry about the principles of that once great party.
Thank you. For our next story, we have Professor John Curtis predicting that the low outcome in the next general election in England due to the candidates being dull as dishwater. Quote. Polling expert Professor John Curtis has warned of low turnout at this year's general election, in part because voters regard Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer to be, quote, dull as dishwater. Speaking at an event for the Citizens Advice charity, Curtis cited boring leaders as one of the three reasons why the voting numbers would be down. We have two party leaders, three if you include Ed Davey. None of them enthuse the electorate. None of them are popular. All of them are regarded as dull as dishwater. He told an online seminar on predictions for the election this year. The two other factors likely to suppress voter turnout were the ideological similarity between Labour and the Conservatives. The opinion poll suggested Labour will win comfortably, he said. The difference between the parties is relatively narrow because the Labour Party has veered quite strongly back towards the centre, although the Conservatives are trying to create some ideological space between them. On the polls, Curtis said, if the opinion polls at least remain where they are, it will be all bar the shouting. So, what's the point of turning out to vote, he said. So you have an election where there isn't much diversity in the parties, it's obvious who is going to win, and the parties are extremely boring. That's not a recipe for high turnout. End quote. Curtis said voters need an impetus to cast their ballots. He said the apparent predictability of the election could change if opinion polls began to narrow, which could boost turnout. A low turnout was unlikely to have an impact on the outcome, he said. Would it really make any difference? Probably not, because it will probably affect supporters of all parties. Electoral turnout in the UK peaked in the 1950 general election at almost 84%. It hovered well above 70% for the rest of the 20th century. In 2001, it slumped to 59.4% when Tony Blair was elected for a second time. It has improved slightly since, reaching 68.8% in 2017 and 67.3% in 2019. Professor Curtis was referring to the electoral battle between Conservatives and Labour in England and ignored the differing situation in Scotland, where the SNP are the largest party. Looking at the last part of that story, how do you think this story applies to Scotland? Do you think that the story of parties too similar to each other with boring leaders, how does that apply to Scotland?
I think it looks like distant politics again. Often it does. Often Westminster politics looks like a faraway country. Hardly mentions Scotland, only as an afterthought usually. The big narrative that Keir Starmer wants you to believe that Labour Party need to win Scotland and win Scotland big to be able to win in Westminster. And that's a narrative that's plainly not true. You know, I think it's been twice since 1955 that Scotland and the number of Scottish seats decided an election. Mostly it's decided in the 600, well, just short of that, in the 590 constituencies in England. That's where Westminster elections are normally decided, and they're decided there. And if Scotland want a different decision, too bad, really. I think the greyness of both of the candidates, and not just that as a personal thing, but their policy platforms are very, very poor. Very lacking in ambition. So, like I said, Labour are going to say that we need a fresh start, but they're not offering us an exciting vision of the future that we can all buy into. That people will vote Labour because they want to get out the Tories. But there are, I think, many ways of getting out the Tories. I think the message in Scotland is if we vote SNP for Scottish independence, that will be on the first line of the manifesto. It will be on most of all of the literature, I would imagine. I think that's an exciting story to tell on the doorsteps. There's never any. We're never complacent. Sorry, that was the word I was searching for. We're never complacent in the SNP. We want to have conversations with as many voters as possible to hear their concerns and see what we can, as a party, as a government, what we can do to try and ease the cost of living crisis, respond to the climate emergency. Anyway, yeah, it is different in Scotland, much different, and will be a completely different election.
Thank you. The UK's biggest high street lenders expect the sharpest rise in defaults on unsecured lending since 2009, according to a Bank of England survey, as households come under growing pressures amid the cost of living crisis. The figures from the BOE show banks expect a marked rise in the number of people who fail to meet repayments on credit cards, loans, and other forms of unsecured borrowing over the next 3 months. An index of lenders' expectations for defaults in the first quarter of 2024 showed a reading of plus 31.7 on the bank's credit conditions survey. If the forecasts are accurate, it would mark the sharpest quarterly rise in defaults since late 2009 during the global financial crisis. Households are coming under mounting pressure from rising borrowing costs after 14 consecutive interest rate rises from the central bank since December 2021. Launched in response to the inflation shock triggered by the cost of living crisis and supply shortages caused by Brexit, the COVID pandemic, and Russia's war in Ukraine. Defaults on mortgage payments also increased sharply at the end of last year, according to the Credit Conditions Survey, and are expected to continue rising in early 2024 as more borrowers feel the pinch. Despite a price war in the mortgage market at the start of the year, millions of homeowners are expected to face a sharp rise in borrowing costs as they reach the end of the cheaper deals agreed before interest rates had begun rising. Tom, do the Conservatives still hold the claim of being the party of sound money?
They like the sound of money. Yeah, absolutely they do. They are the party of business. They still are the party of business. They're the party of extracting the maximum profit for their class. I'm sorry, most things come down to class politics still in 2024. At the moment, over the last 15 years, we can talk about really disastrous economic policies for your average person. So if we talk about the first 5 years of the 2010s was austerity with George Osborne. The next disastrous thing was pushing Brexit and executing Brexit up between kind of 15 and 20, if you like. And then if we think about the last 4 years, well, 5 years near enough since Boris Johnson was elected, we've had massive economic roller coasters, including with it less than 40 days with Liz Truss, who crashed the market, gave us all economic problems up and down the country. People are paying higher mortgages directly because of her. Yeah, there are some external shocks as well. Obviously, the war in Ukraine, and also, potentially the war in Gaza and the destabilization in the Middle East at the moment will also have an economic impact. I would say, and always if you ask me, would be what the position could be if we were in independent Scotland. We could make lots of different choices. We could be generating our own electricity at the moment, and profits from that being drawn back into the public purse. Those are possibilities within independent Scotland. Very unlikely, I would say, under Westminster's yoke, if I can use that term.
Thank you. Taking a look at American politics. In the wake of an Iowa primary election chilled in record blast of cold weather, Republican presidential candidates are embracing the fossil fuel industry tighter than ever, with little to say about the growing toll of the climate crisis that is taking on Americans. Sorry. The remaining contenders for the U.S. presidential nomination, frontrunner Donald Trump, along with Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, all used the Iowa caucus to promise surging levels of oil and gas drilling if elected, along with a wholesale abolition of Joe Biden's climate change policies. In a Fox News town hall on the eve of the Iowa primary, Trump said, "We are going to drill, baby, drill." The ex-president said, "We have more liquid gold under our feet, energy, oil, and gas than any other country in the world. We have a lot of potential income," he said. Trump also called clean energy a, quote, "new scam business," end quote, and went on a lengthy digression on how energy is important in making of donuts and hamburgers. The Trump campaign has accused Biden of trying to prevent Americans from buying non-electric cars, although no such prohibition exists. Trump has claimed Biden was causing people's dishes to be dirty by imposing new efficiency standards for dishwashers. Nikki Haley has called the Inflation Reduction Act a communist manifesto, end quote, and used the Iowa election to promise to roll back all of Biden's green subsidies because they're misplaced. DeSantis, who came second in Iowa, said that on his first day as president, he will take Biden's Green New Deal. "We will tear it up and we will throw it in the trash can. It is bad for the country." Last year was, globally, the hottest year ever recorded, and scientists have warned of mounting calamities as the world barrels through agreed temperature limits. Last year, the U.S. suffered a record number of disasters, costing at least $1 billion in damages, with the climate crisis spurring fiercer wildfires, storms, and extreme heat. But only dissent from young climate activists who disrupted at rallies held by Trump, Haley, and DeSantis. On Sunday, a 17-year-old activist from the Sunrise Climate Group interrupted a Trump speech to shout, "Mr. Trump, your campaign is funded by fossil fuel millionaires. Do you represent them or ordinary people like me?" She was drowned out by boos from Trump supporters and then scolded from the stage by the former president, who told the activist to go home to mommy. He then said the protester was young and immature. Some Republicans have warned that the party must take climate change seriously if it is to remain viable electorally, with increasing numbers of Americans alarmed by the impacts of global heating. If conservatives are scared to talk about the climate, then we're not going to have a seat at the table when discussions are made, end quote. That was from Buddy Carter, a Republican congressman for Georgia. We are right on policy, so we need a seat at the table. Tom, with the Republicans taking the stance of we need more money, therefore we need to drill, how would you expect this dialogue to develop when Dems and Republicans get to meet each other on stage?
it's all really interesting in the kind of electoral calculus, isn't it? Not only who wins the election, which will be all over the news in 24, but it's also winning. It's who takes control of the Senate, who takes control of the House. That can really make or break a president or their ability to act and get their legislative program through. With some of the things you've said, and obviously having watched Trump and Trump's politics, I think it's not serious. The problem is, it seems like it's not serious politics, but it is drip, 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 drip nonsense constantly. People like him because he's fun. He's an entertainer, and will say things that is kind of out of the box for people. I think they admire that, but yeah, it's a very scary battle. I mean,
Can you compare it to Sunak in the UK at all?
Sorry?
Can you compare it to Sunak in the UK at all? This battle that you're talking about?
I'm really glad that we don't appear to have gone down the gerontocracy route that America has. In America, they'll have two 80-year-olds fighting to be president. At least we've got younger people, relatively so, in Britain.
What about how do you think globally countries are reacting to climate change? Like in the UK, are we taking the necessary precautions or?
No, we're not. We definitely rolled back. I think there was it was the Uxbridge by-election end of last year. One of the reasons Labour stated not to have won that was issues of the ULEZ scheme in London, in outer London, and that was blamed for them not taking that seat. And Rishi took the same message from that to let him off the hook and to be able to move back from climate promises that have been made. Again, it's not serious politics. This, whether we like it or not, the climate change will be the issue of politics over the next 100 years. It will lead to massive displacement of people. We will have to spend significant amounts of money to it. Let's get started. I saw a program the other day. We talked about us being in a post-climate crisis phase because it's already started. It's happening, and if we have these people in politics, then we are moving inches closer to destruction.
Thank you, Tom. Remaining in the U.S., the U.S. state of Alabama is preparing to execute a death row inmate using nitrogen gas, an experimental method that veterinarians in the U.S. and across Europe have deemed unacceptable as a form of euthanasia for most animals. Barring last-minute appeals, Kenneth Smith, 58 years old, is scheduled to be judicially killed on the 25th of January using a previously untested technique. Alabama's Department of Corrections is proposing to strap him to a gurney, apply a respirator mask to his face, and enforce him to breathe pure nitrogen, which would cause oxygen deprivation and death. The method has not been subjected to scrutiny for humans other than reports of workplace accidents in which people became unintentionally trapped in nitrogen-rich environments and died. Veterinary scientists, however, have carried out laboratory studies on animals and have largely ruled it out for ethical reasons. Guidelines produced by veterinary authorities in the US and Europe advise that nitrogen hypoxia is the method, as the method is known, is unacceptable for the euthanasia of most mammals other than pigs, larger mammals. The recommendation says should be sedated to render them unconscious before the gas is applied. Alabama's execution protocol does not include an initial sedative. Last week, a federal judge approved Smith's execution using nitrogen gas. Judge Austin Hoffacker said he has been unpersuaded by the prisoner's claims that the untested procedure posed him an intolerable risk of harm. However, international pressure on Alabama is mounting. On Tuesday, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva expressed alarm that Smith's proposed execution, which is described as suffocation by nitrogen gas, could amount to torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment banned under international law. Smith was previously subjected to a failed execution on November in 2022, in which he was placed on the gurney for hours in an unsuccessful search for a vein through which to inject lethal drugs into him. In the wake of that failed execution, Smith has displayed symptoms of profound trauma. His own prison doctors have reported that he suffers sleeplessness, migraines, depression, and anxiety. Tom, when we're judging something as being acceptable euthanasia, what is it that we're looking for?
I don't think it's. Maybe this is personal, but I think it's across polite society. Well, it's across society in Scotland that there's no form of capital punishment that's humane, for a whole list of reasons. Your description when you're reading out the news story, it sounds barbaric, doesn't it? We would and America would criticize other regimes around the world for this kind of behavior. It's brutal. When we look at polling, it's never very high for capital punishment here, but still significant. So in any democratic society, we need to have these conversations. We need to establish the principles by which we have a humane and decent society. So yeah, these questions need to keep on coming back up and need to be replayed. So no, it's not humane. It's not humane to kill people. It's not humane for the state to have this monopoly on violence there.
Thank you. The Scottish Government, a consultation on increasing recycling and reuse of resources. Proposals to increase reuse and recycling and cut waste are being put forward as part of a consultation. Reducing single-use disposable items like cups, banning the destruction of unsold goods, and promoting the reuse of construction materials are just some of the actions being suggested as part of a draft for a circular economy and waste route map consultation. Over the past 10 years, the total amount of waste going to landfill in Scotland has dropped by over a third, with the most recent official statistics showing that Scotland met its 2025 target to reduce all waste by 15%. Following an initial consultation in 2022, a new route map sets out a plan for a new national reuse and recycling targets, along with priority actions needed between now and the end of the decade to help drive Scotland's transition to a circular economy. The actions complement provisions in the Draft Circular Economy Bill, which is currently at stage 1 in Parliament, and include proposals for the creation of local recycling targets, reflecting the success of Wales, which has one of the highest household recycling rates in the world. Circular Economy Minister Lorna Slater said, "We have already made good progress across Scotland, significantly reducing the amount of waste we generate and landfill. But we need to go further in reusing the recycling goods and make it the default choice for households, businesses, and the public sector. For people to do the right thing for the planet, it is crucial that everyone experience a modern, easy-to-use waste service. This second consultation sets out that our priority actions and the tools we will put in place to help everyone play their part in cutting waste and capitalizing on the economic opportunities. This is a circular economy and capitalize on the economic opportunities that a circular economy presents to businesses. I urge everyone to take part." Tom, much like the bottle return scheme, this proposal is being accused of being entirely unrealistic in terms of its costing. Um, what's your read on this? Is Lorna Slater planning things badly? Is she too ambitious, or is the rest of Scottish Parliament or some parts of it lacking ambition for these green policies?
I mean, firstly, I think the bottle return scheme was in place and was ready to run actually, and I think um, there was a concerted effort to stop it working. Now, these types of schemes run all across Europe with very little hitch. They've been running for years. Um, we can obviously do it, except that Westminster felt that there was problems with competition. It We can make our own solutions. So the deposit return scheme would have worked. I've no doubt about that. I think the new circular economy bill is again. Sometimes it's quite obvious. Of course, we need to reuse, reduce the use of materials, of resources. We need to be able to repurpose them. We need to stop things going to landfill. Of course we do. I think one really important key is education, and I think people in general are getting a lot more savvy. So at a local level, I live in West Lothian. The For your bin to be able to go out, you need to have sorted it efficiently. So you need to get your cans and your bottles in one, your papers and cardboard in another, and there will be some checks. And so people are getting used to that. I think kids at school, for instance, my kids come home and tell us the importance of recycling and, to my mind, reducing the use of these materials. In schools, everybody has a drinking cup that they can top up at the water fountain. That's really important. Stops us needing plastic bottles wherever we go. All of us need to remind each other not to use these plastics. So it's good to have a bill in place to remind us all of it.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Tom Ullathorne of the SNP Socialists. And that mostly wraps us up for today. That is it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who has donated to our emergency crowdfunder over the past 2 weeks. We are now only £2,000 short of our target and very hopeful that we will reach £10,000 by the end of this week. Although the immediate pressure has been eased and we can now focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland, our need to grow our subscriber base and increase our funding is still urgent. But with that, good night and thank you for watching.